Wonderful to have you with us this morning as we welcome JP Landman. Just some housekeeping rules. Could I ask that you mute your mics, and also in the interest of bandwidth, looks like we could have as many as 45, 46 people on this call. So just to ensure that we don't disrupt the bandwidth and the signal, could I ask that you mute your mics and also your cameras unless you have been given an opportunity to ask a question later. JP specifically asked that this be an interactive session, and there will be ample time for questions, for you to formulate your questions, to frame them, and we'll also have the opportunity to raise your hands, and you can address your questions directly to JP during the Q&A session. So once again, welcome. This is an incredible turnout, and JP, it bears testimony to your reputation as an analyst and a commentator. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Edwin O'Neill, the Director of SAC&CHAM and the CEO of Bright Insurance. Edwin, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everybody, and hi, JP. Great to see you again, and really looking forward to your chat. JP is very well known to all of us in many ways, and a number of us have heard him speak about the political and economic trends, and so we're super excited, given the events of the last few days and weeks and months, in fact, just to hear your views, JP. JP is also author and ex-Harvard and Oxford student, and he has spent some time through the University of Free State, and of course we all know that the President has requested him to be part of the Planning Commission. JP, I'm not going to be any longer. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edwin. Thank you, Mike, for your warm words. Let me just check. Can you hear me? And is the sound okay?
I'm hearing you loud and clear.
Great. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And as Mike has said, ladies and gentlemen, please make this an interactive session. You can interrupt me at any time. You can put questions in the chat box, whatever. But let's have a discussion. I thought what would be useful is to talk this morning about the topic, will South Africa ever grow again? And as from the data that I will show you, you will see, but you know, I mean, you don't need me to tell you that we haven't grown for a long time, and that in fact South Africa today is poorer than what we were 6-7 years ago. And so the question is, will the economy ever take off again? And the key to that, in my opinion, lies, as you can see there, lies with structural reform. So let's go there and discuss the detail. Now, the question is, of course, what will the recent unrest do to our growth prospects? And here a bit of background is necessary. When Minister Tito Mboweni submitted his budget in February, the budget was based on a GDP growth rate of 3.3%. And that was more or less in the middle of the consensus as it was in February. Then by the middle of the year, virtually all economists, not virtually, all economists have upgraded their growth forecast. Those that were very low went up a bit, those that were already high went up a bit, and the consensus moved to somewhere between 4.5 and 5%. And you all know why that is. It is because we had an enormous commodity run, and the positive terms of trade from those exports boosted economic growth considerably. Now, you know, if you base your budget on 3.3% and the actual numbers come in at 4.5 or 4%, then obviously you're doing quite well. And it just again gave credence to an old rule which was formulated or written down in 1941 by then Professor Cornelius de Kiewit, who was at Wits University, and in his absolutely magisterial book on the history of South Africa, I still think it's the best South African history book there is. He wrote, South Africa is a country that advances. Note that verb. That verb is very important. South Africa is a country that advances through political disasters and economic windfalls. And we're seeing it very clearly this year again. A marvelous agricultural season, very good commodity prices in the export markets, and our growth rate jumped from 3.3% to 4.5%. So now the question is, how much will KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng unrest take off this number? We don't have forecasts out yet from many economists, but it seems to me so far the number is lying at about somewhere between 0.25% and 0.5%. So that 4.5 can go down to 4.25, or it could even go down to 4%. And just to give you a feel, although I'm mixing up different things here, so don't take it too seriously, but we've got an economy which is over $5 trillion rand, not dollars, and the damage in KwaZulu-Natal was 15 billion, about 1/3%. But of course, I'm mixing here flows and stock, so be careful. I'm just trying to give you a feel for how much the unrest can cost us. So let's assume for the moment that our forecast growth rate of 4.5% goes down to 4%. Then you will see it is still above the 3.3% that Mr. Mboweni worked the budget on in February. Now, that number of 4% you must compare with population growth of 1.6%. That is, if you include immigration. Now, of course, we don't know precisely how many people are coming into the country, but we work on an assumption of 1 person every 2.5 minutes. That's, of course, a thumbsuck, but it's an assumption. And that will then give you a growth rate of 1.6%. Without immigration, our call it domestic population growth rate, our homegrown population growth rate will be around 1%. But you've got to provide for immigration, so that takes the number up to 1.6%. So you can compare the 4% economic growth or 3% economic growth, 3.3%. You can compare that to the 1.6%. And here is the key point. This economic growth at 4% or even at 3.5% is higher than population growth for the first time in 6 years. We've got 6 years behind us where the economy grew slower than the population. That's why I've said earlier that we are poorer than what we were a few years ago. And you see it all very well illustrated on this graph, which is a 45-year graph. You've got 45 years of history there, from 1975 all the way to 2020. And you can see, ladies and gentlemen, that 2020 really hit us hard. I mean, there's absolutely no question about it. Look how far that blue bar comes down. It was a very severe punch. But what you also see is that in the 5 years before 2020, I'm circling my little arrow there now. In the 5 years before 2020, the economy was already in what I call a recession. Now, it's not a recession in the technical sense of the word, but I call it a recession simply because population growth was higher than economic growth, except for 1 year over there where it was 0%. But essentially, for 5 years, incomes have stagnated. For 5 years, the tax base didn't grow. For 5 years, we didn't really create more jobs. Now, you can't do all these things and then not have a social fallout somewhere. And we've seen that very dramatically illustrated recently. And then, of course, in 2020 was the cherry. I don't know whether cherry is the right word, but it was the cherry on top, and it really hit the stuffing out of the economy. So if you put numbers to all of this, there you can see what happened before and after democracy. You can see what happened in the 5 years before COVID. We basically got 3% poorer. Now, 3% may not sound like a lot, but there are practical consequences. As I've said, your tax base is smaller, you don't create jobs, there aren't that many opportunities, profit margins are under pressure, small businesses suffer. There's meaning to that -3%. And then after the 2020 COVID recession, or blow rather, to our economy, we are now 11% poorer than what we were in 2014. Now, 11% is a huge knock to take. You can apply it to yourselves. If your income that you have, your salary, your commission, whatever you earn, your pension, if that is 11% lower after you've provided for inflation, these are all real numbers, so it's after inflation numbers, then I think you will agree with me that that you will have a problem in balancing your personal and domestic books. And that's essentially what happened to South Africa. So if the economy this year grows at 4% or 3.5%, it's comfortably above 1.6%. It is a comfortable break with the 6 years that we've had. Let me just go back there. With the 6 years that we've had, and in a sense, it's a new beginning. So for me, the issue is not really 2021. Even after the KwaZulu unrest, I've shown you the numbers. If we go down to 4%, if we go down to 3.5%, it is still substantially more than population growth. So in that sense, 2021 is a very important trend break here for South Africa. But the issue for me is not so much 2021. The issue is 22, 23 and further out. Can we actually improve our growth rate beyond what is called the South African growth ceiling? Now, the Reserve Bank, Treasury, private sector economists, they all at the moment agree that our ceiling that we have on growth is more or less 1.5 to 2%, which is more or less for all practical purposes equal to population growth. So the question is, can you shift that ceiling? Can we break through that ceiling? What is not going to happen? What is not going to happen in South Africa is that we're not going to get the easy monetary policies that you have, for example, in the US, in the UK, in the EU, Japan, and other developed economies. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do modern monetary theory. We're not going to do bond buying. We're not going to do that kind of thing. We're also not going to do fiscal policies, running bigger deficits and in that way stimulating demand and get the economy going. Those two options are clearly not available to South Africa, and we can talk about why I say that, but we can't pursue it. In his first speech, when he became president in February 2018, Mr. Ramaphosa made it very clear, and I quote from it, he said, "We're not going to spend our way into wealth. We're not going to spend our way into having growth, because obviously it is not a sustainable picture." He has sustained that particular statement, that particular argument over the last 3.5 years that he's been president, and you see it in the behavior of the Minister of Finance, you see it in the budgets. Of course, the left in the country don't like it. I use left just as a way of an easy description. There's a lot of pressure that the Reserve Bank should really print money and should buy government bonds. And when they buy the government bonds, it means the deficit can be bigger. And when the deficit is bigger, you can spend more money on social affairs, on alleviating poverty and so on. So if we rule out those two, and I've said I'm happy to take questions and a discussion about why we rule them out, then there's only one way open, and that is you have to improve productivity in the economy, and you can only do that through structural reform. In the long run, there is nothing as important as productivity increases. You take a 20-year view, a 30-year view, a 40-year view, there's nothing as important as productivity increases. And that can only come through structural reform. And that's the way that the government has chosen. You see it, as I've already said in the President's speech, you see it in the October 2020 Economic Recovery and Reform Plan, the so-called EREP. You see it in the establishment of Vulindlela, which means make way, literally take away, so that you can improve the performance of the economy. So what then are the government plans, and what progress have we seen so far? And I've tried to put here some numbers to the structural reform which is on the table. There's the growth ceiling that I've told you about, 1.5 to 2%. Then on the left-hand side, you've got 5 items of action. You've got electricity. Below that, you've got spectrum and internet. You can really call it digital infrastructure. Thirdly, there's public employment. Now, just on public employment, let's not confuse it with civil service employment. Not the same thing at all. Public employment are people who are employed in a variety of jobs like work for water, work for fire, cleaning up roads, painting schools, that sort of thing. And they earn 50 to 60 Rand a day. And recently, if they are permanently employed, which they're not, they get a stipend of 3,500 Rand a month. That's public employment, very different from civil servants and civil service employment. And then later on the screen, lower down on the screen, you can see infrastructure and railways. Why do I have a space between them? I have a space because the progress on the first three have been very substantial. And therefore we should see the kind of spin-off that is shown in the middle of the screen. On infrastructure and railways and ports, we've had a nice boost in the last couple of months, but I think it will take time for that to work through. Why do I say it will take time? For infrastructure, you're dependent on local government, not completely, but at least partly. We all know what problems there are in local government. Changing the way that the railways and the ports operate is a very clear government commitment. It's a very clear policy. Transnet is behind it, but it will take time to put these things into practice. The first request for proposals for the Durban harbour will only come out in October. So you can see, if the request for proposal is in October, you will probably only really make meaningful progress with the Durban harbour in the course of 2022. And that's why I've separated the two out, to give you a feel for the areas of good progress and the areas of less quick progress. And then the numbers that you see next to electricity, for example, 0.25% growth, next to spectrum, 0.6% and so on. These numbers were calculated by the Treasury as part of the economic modelling. And the Treasury economic modelling is very good. It's the best in the country, partly because they use private sector research houses to help them, and they've done quite well in the past. So you can certainly work with these numbers with a high degree of credibility when it comes to growth numbers. And what you can see there is that the full dividend that we can harvest in the next 2 or 3 years is that we take the growth rate from 1.5%, 2% to 3.5%, 3.7%. If you take electricity alone, Treasury calculates that installing new capacity, allowing renewable energy to come in, that can add 0.25% to growth, and those numbers have been confirmed by Ernst & Young. But removing the constraint on the economy can actually bring as much as 1% growth in GDP. I haven't even brought that into the calculation because confidence is such a difficult thing to quantify. So I think there's a very, very good chance that if the government's chosen the route of structural reform in the areas listed there, we can actually see good progress. Just for the sake of completeness, these 5 areas that I've highlighted are not the only areas where government's plans are being made or are taking shape. There's a total of 8 areas. But the others refer to issues like building a capable state, sorting out the land reform question, dealing with property rights, Section 25 and so on, which again will not give you an immediate direct growth dividend. And as I've said, I'm focusing here on structural reform, but I'm happy to take questions there about that. So this slide I made for you because in the past I used to have a slide which covered 2 slides in a PowerPoint analyzing what the balance of forces are in the ANC and can Mr. Ramaphosa pull off these plans that he's got, these plans that I just told you about. After what happened in March, and then what happened in April, and then recently the unrest in KwaZulu-Natal, Mr. Zuma's incarceration and so on, the slide is actually very short. The slide is very brief. It's quite clear that Ramaphosa is now in charge of the ANC in a way that he's never been since he was elected. It's quite clear that the NEC, the National Executive Committee, which consists of about, if everybody is there, 110, 114 people, have really rallied behind the president and they accept his agenda. And it's quite clear that the RET faction, the Radical Economic Transformation faction, has been finished off. Ismagashula is suspended. Karel Neas is suspended. Tony Ngeni is probably on his way out. And I think the other two will also be on their way out. They will be expelled from the party. KwaZulu-Natal as a dominant force in the ANC has taken a hell of a knock. They've been replaced by Gauteng as the most important political province inside the ANC. And ironically, I think the unrest in KwaZulu-Natal have actually helped to finish them off inside the party. Very bad for South Africa, and of course a lot of damage and so on. We all know the downside, but there's no question that the public reaction against the KwaZulu-Natal violence have helped to finish them off. Which raises an interesting speculative question, and that is, what is the future of the economic freedom fighters? They yesterday had their 8th birthday. They were established on the 26th of July, 8 years ago. And they are, for all practical purposes, at the moment, a 10 to 11% party. That's what they got in the election, 10.7%. So let's call them an 11% party. If I was the EFF, I would be very worried about the South African public's reaction to the violence and the looting and the unrest. It's quite clear that South Africans are not that susceptible to the language of let's burn and march and violence and threaten people and so on. And it remains to be seen. We will see in the local government elections to what extent that kind of radical, aggressive, populist rhetoric has got a hold on politics and to what extent it does not. And I think if the EFF cannot grow this year beyond 10%, they got about 8% in the last local government elections, they got 11% in the national elections. So if you compare apples with apples, they've got to beat the 8% that they got 5 years ago in the local government. If they don't break the 10, 11, 12% barrier, I think they are basically at a kind of a plateau, more or less in the same position as the DA, which then of course leaves much more room to play for the ANC. But that's a speculative position. I have no hard data to give it to you. I'm just asking the question in the light of the unrest that we've had. I feel that I do want to just give a bit of a longer term look on the 3 years that we've now had Mr. Ramaphosa as president. You know, just think back a little bit. Today is the 27th of July. 27 July 2018, 3 years ago, Tom Moyane was still in charge of SARS. Think about that. Sean Abrams was still in charge at the National Prosecuting Authority. Since then, the two of them obviously are gone, but not only them, also virtually the entire layer of management below them, both at SARS and at the NPA. Prosecutors that were promoted by Mr. Zuma literally in the 48 hours before they left office. Literally in the 48 hours before they left office, 5 of them, 5 senior national prosecutors, were all demoted by Ramaphosa. 3 accepted it, 2 took him to court, he won both court cases. The one thing we must say of Mr. Ramaphosa is that he has excellent legal advice because he wins case after case after case. So clearly that flank is covered. So 3 years ago, Ramaphosa was president of the country, but the NPA and SARS were on the other side. In February that year, we got a new board at Eskom. We got a new CEO, the very decent Pakamani Gadebe, who came over from the financial services sector, a very, very decent man, but of course completely out of his depth. But you know, things were changing and we were thinking, okay, 2019 is the year where things will happen. 2018 is to take control. And that was when Ramaphosa built up and then broke, when people realized it's going to take a while to get control. And we were looking sort of at a renewal in 2019. Then in February 2019, we got the worst load shedding that we've ever had. It's never been as bad as it was in January, February 2019. We saw the collapse of Eskom management. The chief executive had to be transported in an ambulance from his office to hospital. He just couldn't take it anymore. I think the lesson is very clear. You can't take a very competent, very reliable, very honest, very decent financial services man and put him in a technical position like the one at Eskom. You're breaking him. And that's absolutely what happened. And by December 2019, we had load shedding in January, February, continuing through the year. In December, we had stage 6 load shedding. That load shedding was really a body blow to the economy in 2019. Make no mistake. If we didn't have that, our growth picture would have looked very different. Then Andre de Ruyter was appointed at Eskom, some changes to the board. It looked as if we're now ready. The government had their economic recovery plan on the table. We're ready to go in 2020. Then came 2020 and we had COVID. So the economy locked down in March. I was thinking about it this morning when I put out my rubbish bin and the people came around to collect the bins. They were not even rubbish collection in that time. The whole economy closed down. And we had to get through it. Enormous impact on the budget. You saw the graphs, you know what it did. Some businesses did well, but most did not. And then in November, December, we had a second wave, so you can write off 2020. And I think now that we have been through COVID, we've survived it, it looks as if we can carry on. We were looking forward to 2021. And what did we get? We got the third wave of COVID, the Delta variant, and we got the KwaZulu-Natal unrest. But as I've pointed out to you, at least per capita incomes will start increasing this year, which they haven't done for 6 years. So I must tell you, I have a little bit of sympathy for Mr. Ramaphosa for these macro events that hit him or hit his program. And I must tell you, I have a huge admiration for his resilience to just carry on. He is in this position now. This is what has happened. He must just take it and carry on. And I think he, under the circumstances, is doing well. And I know that may sound like a renegade opinion, but happy to engage with you about that. All right, so Mike, Edwin, let me conclude. What do we learn from these few slides that I've given you? The first one is that we've been in a demographic recession for 6 years. You pay a price for getting poorer. You know, my late father said to me 25, 35 years ago.
Sorry, Jerry.
Yes. Yeah.
May I just ask the participants, please take their cameras offline. We are starting to lose bandwidth, and then if you can just start with the so what slide again, because you were cutting out quite badly. Thank you.
I'm sorry about that. As you've seen, we've been in a demographic, thank you for that. We've been in a demographic recession now for 6 years. And obviously you pay a price for getting poorer. You know, as I've said, your tax base shrink, you don't create the jobs that you have to, profit margins are under pressure, investment can't take place. You can't get poorer and progress. It's not possible. It's one of the two. And for the last 6 years, we got poorer and we didn't progress. In spite of the KwaZulu-Natal unrest, I think there's a very good chance that this year we will see a reversal in that decline for the reasons that I discussed. Ongoing structural reform in electricity, in water, in railways, in harbours. The program of the government essentially of lifting productivity in the economy will determine what happens in the future, and we'll get our guidance from the economists. They will tell us what they expect for next year and the year thereafter. But everybody seems to agree, everybody in the economics fraternity seems to agree that if we do the structural reform, we will harvest a growth dividend. There's a very strong political will for structural reform, and there's a very strong political base for structural reform. That's what the president wants to do. He has consistently ruled out loose fiscal and monetary policies. He's consistently said we're going to do it the hard way, and there's a program with 8 items. We've discussed 5 of them. So, Mike, I'm looking forward to questions and discussions. This is just a bit of a background for where I think we are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, JP. That's some very interesting data, and I think it puts in context exactly what people are thinking right now as we move forward into a South Africa that we all deserve. So folks, we are going to open up for Q&A now. Please use the chat facility if you prefer. I'm very happy for you to use the raise your hand facility. I will acknowledge you. And please, may I ask, when we go into that session, that if you are not online, not posing a question, could I please ask you to mute your mics and to switch the cameras off? We will acknowledge you as soon as we possibly can. So can we kick off with the first question? Do we have any questions online, Ariel?
Nobody's posted any.
All right. I have Vito. I'm going to acknowledge you. Vito, you may unmute your mic and switch on your camera. I'm acknowledging you, Vito.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, JP, for that very brief but very precise analysis. As the energy is one of the main topics, and may I just, as a background, I'm a director at Canadian Solar and also the chairperson of the South African Photovoltaic Industry Association. And as such, we see that there's a huge demand for localization in South Africa. And that was the case when this renewable energy independent power producer program started in 2010, 2012. But all those efforts that were done then basically went to ashes because the program was stalled from 2014 to 2018. Now the call is there again, and that call is now, or the investments in that for that call is very hesitant, and even more now through the unrests. What do you tell those investors to come back to South Africa and say, well, have the trust in the future, it will happen? Or would you say, wait a little bit for the round 5, 6 and the risk mitigation to happen? Because without the energy, the economy will not grow, and we are stuck in a deadlock here.
Absolutely. Look, I think I would say two things to the investors. The first one is check the motivation and the intent of the Ramaphosa government. He became president in February 2018, and in April 2018, about 2 months later, 27 IPP contracts, which, as you pointed out, were stuck since 2014. Those 27 contracts were signed, done and dusted, and the investments took place. Since then, in 2019, February 2019, and again in October 2019, and again in 2020, and then most significantly a few weeks ago in 2021, the government has announced a number of measures that have changed the energy landscape in South Africa absolutely fundamentally. So, and we can talk through the detail, I'm sure you know it much better than I do, but the decision to break up Eskom, it's a huge, huge decision. We're terminating a period of about 90 years of one system of electricity generation and distribution, and we're moving into a completely different dispensation. That was clearly spelled out in February 2019 by the president, and it was confirmed in October 2019 by the Eskom roadmap and by the integrated resource plan. But you know, people don't read these things. The integrated resource plan is about 60 pages. The Eskom roadmap is 60, 70 pages. All the detail is there, but people don't read it. And even if they read it, they don't take it seriously. They don't think it'll happen. I remember so clearly, and I think this is directly applicable to your question. I remember so clearly in 2019 when the president made the announcements, the general reaction from industry was, oh, it's very good, but it won't happen. Well, in the end, it did happen, and it is happening. And it is happening against very, very strong political resistance. Remember in 2018, when those 27 contracts were signed, there were strikes and blockades in Tshwane and Johannesburg, mainly by the coal industry, coal truckers, who said this thing is going to cost them their jobs and their livelihoods, and they don't want that. They went to the High Court and eventually to the Appeal Court in Bloemfontein to legally try and block the signing of those 27 contracts, and later on in the development and involvement of the energy policy. There was huge resistance from the trade unions. There was huge resistance inside the ANC. And over a space of about 12, 18 months, the president and the ANC, first of all, he swung the ANC in February 2020. It's now about 18 months ago. Gwede Mantashe, who is the Minister of Energy, but also chairman of the ANC, got up in Parliament and he said, there's no argument about it anymore. We will split Eskom into 3. A year earlier, it was heresy to suggest it or to say it. So that tells you how far the ANC has moved, how the president has changed the thinking with the help of people like Mr. Mantashe, and since then you've seen what happened. So my first answer to your investors would be, look at what the government has done and decide what weight you want to give to that. My second argument would be, look, if you don't want to do it, that's fine. There is enormous interest from other people in investing in the energy landscape in South Africa. In every single opening up that we've had so far of energy investments, the people who wanted to participate and the megawatts that they offered were far, far more than what the subscription round was for. So I'm quite comfortable that even if people from, say, for example, Canada do not want to invest, there will be investors from other parts in the world who have already come in. Let me just make a comment about the REIPP, the short-term 2,000 megawatt story. As you know, the program consists of 2,000 megawatts and 1,200 megawatts, about 60%, was given to the car power ship transaction. I don't know whether the car power ship transaction will proceed. It doesn't look like it. I think it will die in the courts, and it will simply not take place, and it will be replaced. That 1,200 megawatts would be replaced by wind and solar and gas. Those are the 3 big ones that's going to develop in South Africa: wind, solar, and gas. That's just my opinion. I have no particular information. I just have difficulty in seeing that the 1,200 megawatts will continue. There are too many obstacles. Those are the 2 answers that I would give. I hope, Wido, that answers you.
Thank you very much, JP, for that concise response. Thank you for the question, Wido. Prof. Klopper, I recognize you. Please go onto your camera. Prof. Klopper.
Thank you very much, Mike. Much appreciated, and also JP. The context is really interesting, and I value that. If the question I have in my mind, if we look at the structural reform without looking at recipes, because I believe we should not look at what happened elsewhere in the world. They don't have the context. In our contextual interpretation, what are the 1 or 2 most important and relevant areas that we should focus on in the near future as a country?
Well, the near future makes the answer easier. I think personally, the most important thing we have to do is we've got to build a capable state. And you've got to build a capable state clearly in the security cluster. You've got to do it in local government, and you've got to do it in national government. But that's not going to happen in the short term. That's a long-term project. So by limiting, say, what we should do in the short term, I think in the short term, there are really only 2 things. You've got to push the energy story further. You've got to push the infrastructure, the 5 things that I showed you on that screen. We must get progress in those areas. And at the same time, we'll have to do something about the social pressures. I think we are clearly moving towards what you, for all practical purposes, can call a basic income grant. Now, whether you pay 300 Rand or 400 Rand or 350 Rand, 500 Rand, that's a question of what you can afford. But the principle is that you want to get money into the poorer section of the population. So I would say those 2 things. If you say short term, proceed with those 8 areas of structural reform, get the economy growing, and push as much money as you possibly can towards the poorer people in South Africa to help them. I think that's what you've got to do to keep the ship going. Does that answer you?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And I'm curious about the long term, if that is something else, but I appreciate your answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Klopper, and JP to you. Thank you for that concise response. Next up, Bharat Rupa, I recognize you. The question from Bharat, JP. How do you see the impact of foreign direct investment after last week's unrest? Over to you, JP.
Yeah, look, can I go a little bit renegade here?
Please do, JP, please do.
Professor Lindy Koorts, very, very competent historian from Pretoria University, have compiled a list of all the incidents like last week, 2 weeks ago, that we've had in this country since we've become a union. And we have them every 20-25 years. In 1914, we had the rebellion. And she describes very vividly how, particularly in the Free State, towns were looted by poor farmers who lost everything in the Boer War. And when the rebellion broke out in places like Winburg, the poor farmers, the peasantry, went into shops, looted, destroyed them. The husbands joined the rebellion and were later caught and put into jail and so on. And we had it again in 1922 when Jan Smuts unleashed the Defence Force, including the Air Force, against striking mine workers. In that case, white striking mine workers. In 1960, we had Sharpeville and the national unrest that came with that. In 1976, we had Soweto. In the 1980s, we had the 1980s. In the 1990s, we had a low-level civil war between particularly the ANC and Inkatha that, according to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, cost 5,000 lives. And so we can carry on. We had Marikana a few years ago. So first, these things are not new, and you may say I'm very harsh in saying that, but that's the reality of South Africa. It's a society with deep fault lines, and these fault lines explode. You can also say, yes, but that had to do with apartheid. This is very different. This is now democracy. True, but there are things like poverty and exclusion and inequality, which applied as much then as it does now. So first of all, we've had these things and we've always come back from them. I think that's a very important point to make. We've always come back from them. The resilience of the South African economy, the resilience of the South African people is simply such that we come back. What we saw 2 weeks ago with the unrest, I think, which we've never seen before, and that could be because we're now a democracy that includes more people, not everybody, but more people. We've seen the response from the South African citizenry against the violence. And I would make that point to foreign investors. We've seen a closing of the ranks, which have really been remarkable. In the end, Bharat, I don't think foreign investment is the critical variable. I think in the end, the critical variable is domestic investment. If the locals invest, the foreigners will come. If the locals run, the foreigners will run. And what we've seen in the last few years is that the locals have disinvested and the foreigners have disinvested. You can see the numbers. Go and check them in the quarterly bulletin. Last year, I think something like 160 billion rand left the country of foreign and local money. So what you have to do is get investment going by stimulating it from local people. That's where you have to start. And that's where energy, I think, is a superb area. It will require huge amounts of capital. There is huge appetite for it locally and internationally. Our previous round that Wido referred to attracted more than 200 billion, of which 45% of the 200 billion came from foreigners. So clearly there's appetite. And there will be appetite for ports, there will be appetite for railways. I'm not too concerned about the investment side. Foreigners will come if the locals invest. And if you open up a bit more, I'm quite confident that the locals will take the opportunity. Money follows where there is profits. Money goes where there are profits. And if people can see they will make money, they will come and they will invest again. I hope, Bharat, that answers your question.
Thank you very much, JP. Moving on to the next question now from James Mapunda. James's question: what's your take on the role of modernization in government through e-government?
It's extremely important. It's something that government itself has now started realizing. There are a couple of programs going on. Patricia de Lille wants to implement blockchain in the Department of Public Works to keep a record on government properties, government assets. There's a digitization project on the go in the deeds offices, deed administry. We know what's happening in the medical field. There's an urgent need to go electronic in the crime sector. This thing that we still have paper files, which can be lost, which can be burned. You know, it's really old-fashioned. So there's enormous scope for that in government, and I think that's one of the elements. Going for e-government is one of the elements, one of the ways in which we can create a more capable state. But of course, you know, it's a chicken and egg situation. What do you do first? Do you first have competent civil servants and then you employ technology, or do you first employ technology and hope the civil servants become competent? And the answer, of course, is it's both. You will have to move. I think the president, if he can have his way, will push it enormously. He was chairman of the International Fourth Industrial Revolution Commission, set up by the ILO, so he had first-hand exposure to that whole side of what the Fourth Industrial Revolution is doing to societies and how economies must adjust. I think, you know, that's why I put up that slide about all the things that have been hampering him. If he can just come get ahead of the curve, I think you will see a big push by the South African government to go more digital and more e. But it's not an easy road. Don't think that for a moment. The efforts to try and digitize the crime prevention cluster, crime and justice, have been going on for a long time, and the progress is not good, because who must implement it? Well, in many cases, people who don't even have matric, you know, so how do you now do this? And that's why I've said earlier in response to Professor Klopper's comment, building a capable state is not an overnight business. It took the English hundreds of years to become mediocrely competent, and they're not even comparing to the Germans yet. The Germans, you know, started with Frederick the Great in the 17th century, when he made entrance exams compulsory for people who wanted to work in his court. The same in China, the same in Japan. Now ask yourself the question, if entrance exams were introduced in China, Japan, Germany 4 or 5 centuries ago, is there a link between that and the efficiency, the generally acknowledged efficiency of the Japanese and Chinese and German administrations today? I think there is a link. So it'll take time to get there. It'll take time to get there. I hope that answers you.
Thank you so much, JP. Once again, I have a question from Greg Carolyn. JP, with little or no growth predicted, this is an implication for business growth as well. Add the COVID impact. Where do you see companies finding growth opportunities, if not from competitors? There's one for the books, JP.
That's of course the first place is you go for your competitors. That's how the free market is supposed to work, or the market economy is supposed to work. That's how you get productivity. That's how you get innovation. So yeah, that's the first place to go. And those who are not competitive, those who are not productive, those who cannot innovate, well, they will die. That's the way it goes. But I think you've seen here, if we go on a route where the economy grows more than the population, so say 3% versus 1.6%, well, then you open up a huge number of opportunities. I can't tell you precisely where they will be. Some will be in platinum mining, some will be definitely in energy, no question about that. Some will be in infrastructure. And those companies who are at the forefront, they will cash in and they will make good money. And those who are good and competitive and innovative, they will come and harvest the dividend as well. So I think we mustn't hang everything just on GDP growth. GDP growth is busy recovering. That's what we're seeing. Even if we do only 2.5% next year, that's too little and we want more. But it's certainly more than population growth, and it creates a little bit of a margin in which businesses can play, and the good businesses will flourish.
JP, thank you. At this point, the questions are coming in fast and furious, and I want to take the opportunity to ask you, JP, your indulgence. If we ran 5 or 10 minutes over 12 o'clock, are you happy with that?
Absolutely no problem. For as long as
the rest of the participants won't have a problem with that. The questions are really good. Another 2 questions from Donald Painter of Pure Strive. JP, what meaningful efforts are planned and will really take effect to improve the development of SMMEs, as this will surely begin to also help alleviate unemployment?
Look, it is the oldest question in the book, more or less, or the South African book. What can we do to stimulate small business? And nobody has got a silver bullet answer. Many people would argue that a lack of financial support from the banking sector, a lack of a willingness to take risk by the banking sector is a huge reason. That's why you get calls for a state bank and so on. The bankers would be best able to answer that accusation or to answer that point. In the end, I think we need, everybody must play a role. The best analysis I've seen of how you help small business is that small business follow in the wake of big business, and what the person meant with it. And this analysis comes from Joe Schwenker, who was for many years the CEO of Business Partners, the old Small Business Development Corporation. So, I mean, the man worked in that field for a quarter of a century. He knows something about it. So when you have a university town like Stellenbosch or Grahamstown, then small businesses follow the university. They provide stationery, they provide food, they provide services, they fix air conditioners, they fix lighting. So you create opportunities. When Sasol puts up a factory in Mpumalanga or a big plant in Mpumalanga, small businesses go there and they support them. So in a sense, you need a big business so that small businesses can congregate around it. And that for me is still the best that I've seen in terms of the theory of stimulating small business. Then into that picture you get local government. We've seen now with Clover, who closed down in Northwest Province because the local government there just couldn't provide services for Clover, and Clover is now moving to KZN, hopefully to get better services. So local government comes into it. I think that's important. And that's probably, if I must take out one single thing that we have to change in the country, it would be the approach of local government and the ability of local government to support businesses. That's perhaps the one lever that we can still pull. That and financing are probably the 2 biggest things. We don't have a strong, it's developing, but we don't have the kind of strong willingness to lend to entrepreneurs that you see, for example, in the United States. I mean, they've got a very, very well developed private equity market with capital available. Elon Musk cannot do what he's doing in America and South Africa. He can't. It's a very good thing that he went there. Humanity is better off. We don't have the financial system and the risk-taking and the private equity capabilities that can finance a man like Elon Musk. And I think that applies for smaller people as well. They don't have to be Elon Musk, but you just want to start a business. Black business people in particular, small SMMEs, will tell you that they struggle to get finance. And I would say that's an issue to fix. So between those 2 things, finance and having projects or investment which can attract smaller business, those are probably the things that we have to do. I hope that answers you. It was a bit of a dear mekaar antwoord.
Thank you, JP. I'm going to move on now to Anton Castellane, who has a question. JP, in a recent Economist editorial, identifies BBBEE as a key stumbling block to achieving higher growth, given that this policy has thus far, at great expense, benefited the few at the expense of the many. Do you think the ANC is politically able to step away from this policy? JP?
No, they won't step away from the policy because their view is different from the Economist view. The ANC view is that BBBEE has helped a lot to establish the entrepreneurial class, the small businesses that we've just been talking about. It's an area of intense contestation, but there's no unanimity about it. I think that's the important point. The Economist editorial, which was quoted, is one view, and it's a view that you find in South Africa as well, quite a lot. But I think if you ask the majority in ANC, their view would be, no, these things are helping black people. They are helping people who've been excluded from the economy to get in, and we must retain it. That's my reading of the situation. Where I think everybody is agreeing is that we mustn't use BBBEE as an excuse, for example, for corruption in procurement. So I buy this glass from Checkers or wherever. My wife got it for R5, but if I buy it through a BEE company, then it costs R50. Now, clearly that kind of nonsense must stop. And I think there's a general awareness of that thing, that you cannot just lower the price for the same product. Somewhere along the line, there must be either a better service or a different product or some innovation or a lower price. And I think it's to focus a lot on that would be very useful. But I can't see the South African body politic moving away from the BBBEE requirement. I can't see it. It may happen, you know, I can't predict the future. I just don't see it at the moment when I look at the balance of thinking.
Thank you for that comprehensive response, JP. I'm now moving on to a question from Egbert Klapwyk. Even though we have lowering fertility, we are currently not exploiting our democratic dividend with extreme youth unemployment. Will a basic income grant be sufficient to avoid further youth restlessness?
No, I don't think it'll be sufficient, but it'll help, no doubt about that. Look, let's just go back. What did the president do in October last year, about 10 months ago? He announced that 800,000 jobs will be created in public employment by employing, as I've previously explained, people for R3,500 a month. Now, that initiative has benefited a lot of young people, no question about that. But of course, 800,000 is not enough. You know, you need 8 million. You need 10 times as much. And I think a basic income grant will help. I think a basic income grant will also help in respect of the previous question of small businesses, because it creates demand in local areas. And you can then buy goods from and services from other people, and it should have a stimulatory effect. You must go and ask Wati Basson. He's retired now, so we will probably be more willing to talk. But you actually don't have to ask him, just read his annual reports from Shoprite Checkers. Shoprite Checkers benefited enormously from the introduction of social grants, enormously. And I remember one year in which he said, look, this year we won't grow that much and we won't do that much better because there's a tapering off in the allocation of social grants. Now, what benefited Shoprite Checkers can certainly also benefit small entrepreneurs and small businesses in townships and in poor areas and rural areas. So yes, a basic income grant will help, to answer your question. It will help, but it's not sufficient. We have to do much more to mop up the youth unemployment. Absolutely. And you know, every single thing, it's not just one thing, but everything that we can do, training, education, entrepreneurship, innovation, product development, all these things help, and we must do all of them to do something, because then, as you point out, then we will get the demographic dividend, and that will be enormous for South Africa.
Thank you, JP. We have 2 questions to go. We have one from Alan Witherden. The Auditor General presented a damning report on the collapse of municipalities countrywide. How will this impact local investment and growth? Over to you, JP.
The answer is badly. It's already impacted investment and growth in parts of South Africa. You know, I've referred you to Clover, who moved out of the Northwest and so on. It is, I think it is the weakest link in the South African state. If you take the state as the 3 levels of government, and if you take the state as the 3 pillars, executive authority, legislative authority, and judicial authority, then by far the weakest is local government. And I want to shock you by saying this. One of the reasons why we have this problem is because we're paying a penalty for Bantu education. You know, if I take people my age who are now mayors of towns and city managers and councillors, where did they get their education? Well, they got their education in Bantu education. And most of them can't read a budget, or many of them can't read a budget. They don't have experience of running things. So they are a very important part of the executive, but there's no experience of executive. I've got a friend who's a minister in the Roman Catholic Church. Now, I'm not Roman Catholic, but we enjoy red wine, so we spend time together. And Richard, you know, was in the struggle, and he was put in jail, and he was tortured, and all those good things. So he comes from a particular background. And one day we were drinking wine, and he said to me, JP, now as you can hear from my accent, I'm Afrikaans, and he said to me, you know, JP, you guys were really terrible to us. What can I say? I said, yes, Richard, you're right, we were. He said, you know, JP, the things that you did to us, I mean, it was unspeakable. I said, yes, Richard, that's absolutely true. I mean, what can I say? And he went on like this, and he worked me up. And then he said, but the worst thing you did, you denied us the opportunity to get experience. You denied us the opportunity to get experience. And I think we see that at local government level. Now, how do you overcome that? Well, one way of overcoming it is to do cadre deployment. And this may shock you, but I think the problem that we have is that local communities in South Africa choose their mayors through the democratic system. Who controls that local democracy? Who controls that local system? Well, it's the local political networks. And do they necessarily have the skills or the capacity or the ambition to run a proper council? Some do, most don't, if we look at results on the ground. So if you can take somebody like, and I'm just using an example, let's say you take somebody like Tito Mboweni and you appoint him from outside, you deploy him to Johannesburg or to Tshwane and say, you the mayor, go and run the place. The local political structure may not accept him. I can give you a number of examples, and Tshwane is one, where the ANC tried that, and they tried to put good people into councils, and the local political networks just worked them out. You know, Satish Rupa, who is one of the most decent and competent people you can find in South Africa, was deployed in the ANC to go and run Potchefstroom on behalf of the ANC. Well, the local people took him out. So you've got local political networks, patronage with power, and they want to exercise that power. They're not just going to give it away. So it would be nice if we can deploy Tito Mbowenis and Satish Rupas and competent people all over the country and say, please go and run this municipality and that one. The political reality is very different. So you just have to do it the way we're doing it, bit by bit, slowly. The Afrikaans newspaper, Vrye Weekblad, ran and is probably still running a very, very good series of how in rural towns, white and black people, business and taxis and farmers and workers come together and take over the running of the towns, take over the waterworks, take over the sanitation, take over the electricity. And I think that kind of innovative arrangements is already happening, and more of that will have to happen to get us out of the local government morass. There's no question about that. I think everybody agrees there's a problem. How to fix it is a little bit more difficult, because the problems are very deep, very historical, very structural.
JP, thank you very much. We have time just for one last question from Donald Painter. At what point is government going to assist manufacturing capacity and output in South Africa, as currently incentives are limited, if not non-existent?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say they're non-existent. There's an old joke going around in industrial circles that the Department of Trade and Industry pretend to have an industrial policy, and the Treasury pretends to finance it. And I think that's absolutely correct. Look, there is under the Ramaphosa government, there is an industrial strategy. You know the sectors that have been chosen. I don't think you will easily get incentives going, because incentives cost money, you know, and it's very simple. When you must do a basic income grant, or you must fund education, or you must fund police and crime, or you must fund industrial incentives, where do you put the money? It's actually a choice that sort of takes itself. It's a decision that takes itself. You don't have to spend much time working it out. So I don't think we'll see lots of incentives, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to do anything. And I think what the government is trying to do in the selected industries which they've decided on, clothing and textile is one, sugar is another one. They're trying in chickens, don't know whether it's working. They're trying in solar panel manufacturing for renewable stuff. There are huge areas in the economy where a combination of efficient bureaucracy, a little red tape, a little bit of support, not necessarily financially, but almost just morally, can actually make a big contribution. And that's where one must focus. And there are increasing signs that that is exactly what is happening. That is exactly what is happening. But I wouldn't put any money on getting cash. That I don't think will easily happen.
JP, thank you very much. The feedback I'm seeing on the responses to the questions, particularly in the chat facility, I think does you justice in terms of comments like an excellent overview. Thank you, JP. Incisive, insightful. I think the adjectives won't do your presentation justice. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Craig Sumption, the Chief Financial Officer at Hatch Africa, for some concluding remarks and a vote of thanks. Thank you, Craig.
Thanks very much, Mike, and thank you to you and the Chamber for organising yet another interesting webinar. Thank you to the participants for the questions, always generates additional discussion. And thank you, JP, for your time, your insights. In this day of social media, there are many opinions all around, and very few of them are backed up by real data. So thank you for your data. Thank you for the reminder of what has happened. We lose sight with what has happened over time. It's very easy to forget the progress that has been made. And I think, you know, we've been watching the graph of corporate deposits, and over the last 15 years, that graph has just grown and grown and grown. And you're right, there is money available in the country, but locally, we need the confidence to invest that money, and then the foreign investment comes in. So thank you very much for your time. We together have to keep building and growing the economy. Yeah. So thanks everyone for the contributions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and go well.
Thank you very much, Craig, for that. To all our members and partners, thank you very much for your participation. I urge you to continue watching your inboxes. We have some exciting events lined up for over the next 2 months, so please be on the lookout for them. If you want to know more about SACENCHAM, please visit our website at www.sacencham.com. So to everyone, thank you. JP, I think Craig has more than adequately covered what the sentiments are regarding your presentation. Thank you, JP, for being a friend of SACENCHAM. Thank you too for your monthly analysis, which I know is really looked forward to and appreciated by all our second chair members and partners. Thank you once again, JP. To everybody, have a wonderful day and all the very best to all of you. Bye now.